All right, thank you for joining us for this morning's webinar. We are after break, and I'm going to hand over the presentation to Wendy Quackenbush and Peg McCoy to talk about home qualifying populations eligibility.
Thank you, Naomi. Hello and welcome back. We're now going to start part 2 of today's HOME-ARP webinar presentation. This one will focus on tenant eligibility, specifically who qualifies and how you'll need to document the applicant's files at the development. Next slide, Wendy. Today's presenters are Wendy Quackenbush, the Director of Multifamily Compliance, who many of you already know, and myself, Peg McCoy, the HOME-ARP Shelter Administrator. I just joined TDHCA back in March to work specifically on the HOME-ARP program. You'll see our emails and phone numbers if you need to get in touch. Next, if you have any questions as we go along, please enter them into the questions panel of the GoToWebinar, and we'll try to answer them at the end of the session if time permits, or we'll get back to you after the webinar. Here's a list of additional resources that can be found on our website on the HOME-ARP page, which are the same as Tiara's presented earlier in today's first webinar. And again, the recording of this webinar will also be posted on our web page along with the presentation slides. It will also be posted on our YouTube channel. The morning objectives. During this webinar, we will discuss the on-site process of tenant selection and documentation of applicant files. First, who are the qualifying populations, and then we'll go over the eligibility manual we have put together to assist in gathering the documentation needed and how to determine eligibility. We will go over the new forms to assist in this process, such as the declarations that guide the intake worker to determine eligibility and document the applicant files. Eligible applicants for HOME-ARP developments are what we refer to as HOME-ARP qualifying populations, or QPs. They are people experiencing homelessness or are formerly homeless, people at risk of homelessness, at greatest risk of housing instability, and people fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. Also, veterans can qualify if they meet any of the other definitions of a qualifying population, but veterans are not, in and of themselves, a separate qualifying population. We'll go into greater detail of each qualifying population shortly. We've put together the HOME-ARP qualifying populations eligibility manual as a guide. The manual includes an example of a pre-application form for potential tenants to apply for the project waitlist, and a handbook with forms and guides to determine eligibility and how to document files. It can be found on our website. Wendy?
Yep. Yes, thanks. I just wanted to say a few words about this phenomenal handbook that the HOME-ARP team has put together. The Qualifying Populations Eligibility Manual will guide property staff step by step from the initial application process to determining the correct form to use to document the appropriate set-aside of the qualifying household falls under and what documentation is needed to demonstrate program eligibility. Today's webinar covers the same information that's in this manual, so I really encourage everybody, once you have an opportunity, to check this manual out. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Peg.
Awesome. Thanks, Wendy. Here on the next slide, here are the 8 sections of the manual, and we will go over each section following this introduction. The first is how to determine QP eligibility using referrals, which you all just had a presentation on. The preferred order of documentation, the pre-application screener for potential tenants, a chart to assist the intake worker process the pre-application, the QP income chart, the QP declarations, which are forms that help intake staff document the applicant's file based on their QP quote-unquote classification, and an example of staff due diligence form and an oral verification form. QP eligibility through referrals, which again, we had that presentation on, so I won't go into much detail here about it. And if you just jumped on and weren't able to attend the earlier webinar, information from the webinar will be available shortly on our website and on our YouTube channel. As a recap, quickly, there are 3 possible referral methods: expanded CE only, use of CE with other referral methods, or use of CE with a project-specific waitlist, or just project-specific waitlist. Whichever method you select, you have to ensure that all the QPs in the developments area have access to apply to the waitlist, and a waitlist is maintained in chronological order. Now, Wendy's going to talk about the preferred order of documentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. So we're now going to discuss how to document qualifying populations for the HOME-ARP unit. These terms may be a little different than some of our multifamily trainings regarding documentation. For instance, if you've heard the term first-hand documentation, it is the same as third-party verification from source, which we'll take a look at here in the next slide. These two terms can be used interchangeably. We'll now look at the preferred order of documentation, which includes third-party verification that comes directly from the source that was not specifically requested for this application. We'll get a little bit more detail about that. Verification that comes directly from the source that was not specifically requested for the application, written verification from a third-party source, and finally oral verification from a third party. If this cannot be obtained, then intake observation, and finally self-certification. Third-party verification from source is an original document from a third party that has been dated within 120 days when presented by the applicant. Examples of these types of documentation are copies of bank statements, pay stubs, lease contracts, and utility bills. These should be original and authentic documents created by a third-party source, but was not generated specifically for the application. The applicant may provide this information to the property or to the development or to the shelter. These types of documents the household may already have in their possession or can easily obtain. Next, we're going to talk about written third-party verification that are completed by a third-party source, and these types of verifications should never be handled by the applicant or the household to ensure the verification is authentic. For example, a referral from a shelter or service provider and/or an employment verification completed by an employer. Any third-party verification should be reviewed to ensure all information is completed in its entirety. If the verification is mailed, a copy of the envelope it was sent in with postal marking should be maintained in the household's or applicant's file. If it's faxed, ensure it was faxed from an actual source with a company name and fax number. For instance, if you send a hotel manager a verification form and it's faxed, it should indicate the hotel name and fax number. The verification should not come from HEB, for instance. If you're receiving it by email, it's a reliable source if it includes the name of the appropriate person or firm responsible for providing the information, and if the internet information is from a reputable source and includes printouts. Whatever method is used, ensure the party completing the verification has the authority to do so and maintain proof of how the property received the verification in the household's or applicant's file. Next, we're going to cover oral third-party verification, which is a great method for clarifying information for a household file. A property should never rely on documenting a household file with all oral verifications. Oral verification should be from a reliable source and can be used to clarify incomplete verifications and/or discrepancies, and should include the date and time the person talked to or contacted, their title, position, or role with that entity, and the information reported. And the intake person should print their name, sign, and date the verification. We'll look at an example of this form later on in the webinar. Next, we're going to cover intake observation and self-certifications are used as a last resort and only allowable when listed in the qualifying populations eligibility manual. Now, we're going to go over the pre-application screener. The pre-application screener is a form that will help guide property staff to determine what potential qualifying population category an applicant may fall within, and if they qualify to be placed on a wait list. The pre-application screener should be filled out by the person who would like to apply for the development or for the HOME-ARP unit. They can use the screener without intake staff assistance, and it can be done online or in person. It's designed to help the intake worker or the office staff, either one, those terms are interchangeable. It can be used as a screener, again, with the intake staff to determine if the applicant is eligible for the project waitlist, and if the person qualifies for the waitlist, they will fill out the next step, an application with the intake worker's assistance and review. The interested person checks the box or boxes that best describes their current living situation and then submits the form for intake staff or property staff to review for the project-specific waitlist. So some examples are, 1, I'm currently in my home and receiving temporary housing assistance from a program, but it's going to run out soon. Or J, I'm homeless, living outside, in my car, an abandoned building, a camp, transitional housing, or temporary shelter. Now we're going to cover eligibility chart and a few other helpful forms. The pre-screener eligibility chart shown here on the screen is used by the intake worker or property staff to review the pre-application and helps determine which qualifying population category or definition works best for the applicant, and then indicates which corresponding declaration form should be used to help document the applicant's file. So again, as I said earlier this morning, this qualified populations manual is going to take you step by step through this entire process that we're covering in today's webinar. For example, if an applicant selected A, the eligibility screener, which is moved 2 or more times in the last 60 days, the applicant may qualify under at risk of homelessness or greatest risk of housing instability. The staff would go to pages of 16 and 21 with the applicant and complete the paperwork to determine if the person meets all the criteria needed. If the applicant has selected more than one letter, or they qualify under more than one definition, first check to see if the applicant can qualify under the development's preference, if they have one. If not, whichever category best defines their situation. The qualifying population income chart shows the different income restrictions for each qualifying definition. So as talked about this morning by Naomi and Tiara, some of these definitions have income qualifications while others do not. If there's no income level requirements, you do not have to determine income except to determine rent. So for the homeless categories 1, 2, and 3, or formerly homeless or currently housed in domestic violence, there should be no income levels required. However, for most of the at-risk or the greatest risk of housing instability, you will have to determine income. This is to qualify, but you will have to determine income to determine the amount of rent the applicant will pay. This is an example of a form of staff's due diligence that can be used to document files. And you just take a look at this form. It's very similar to a clarification record that we have available on the compliance website at TDHCA. We just want to introduce you to this form. Next is another third-party oral verification form. Again, this is very close to a clarification record, and we talked about what needs to be completed. So this form, if you were using it to verify something oral, you would want to make sure that all these blanks were filled in. Next, we'll go into more detailed definitions of each qualifying population. the required documentation for the applicant's files, and the corresponding declarations. First, what's a declaration? It's a cover sheet or a checklist for the applicant's file, so it helps the intake worker or property staff make sure that they have everything they need in the client's file. The manual includes a declaration form for each qualifying population. And to be clear, these forms do not replace the need to verify eligibility and should be used to support or certify the applicant's statement that they meet the qualifying population definitions and eligibility requirements. Next, we're going to be turning it over to Peg, and she's going to talk about the overview of homeless categories.
Thanks, Wendy. We briefly introduced the qualifying populations, and now we'll go into detail of each category and sub-definition. First, as Wendy said, the homeless categories. A person needs to meet one of the three definitions to be defined as homeless. Homeless category 1 is literally homeless. The most common examples of literally homeless are persons living in a car, park, or in a shelter. Homeless category 2 is someone who will lose their primary residence within 14 days with no other place to stay and no other resources. For the third category, there are many criteria youth or family with children need to meet to qualify under this category, including meeting the definition of homeless from another statute and having housing instability from a long list of factors, including special needs or other barriers. Homeless category 3 may not be widely used to qualify people because of the many criteria involved. Here's the full definition for persons experiencing literally homeless, literal homelessness, category 1. A person or family living in a place not designed to live in regularly, like in a car, park, or camp. 2, a person or family living in a shelter or other temporary living arrangement. And 3, a person who is leaving an institution and who lived in a shelter or place not meant for human habitation prior. We took these definitions and made 2 declaration forms to use when documenting literally homeless. So if the applicant selected D on the pre-application screener, I'm living in a hotel motel and running out of money, and or J, I am homeless, living outside in my car, an abandoned building, a camp, transitional housing, or in a temporary shelter, then use the category 1 declaration, literally homeless. On this declaration, go down the list and collect the required documentation. If the person says they are currently living in a place not meant for human habitation, select I above, and then collect one of the required pieces of documentation. This includes a referral by another housing or service provider and states that the household was living in a place not meant for human habitation. Or it could be a homeless management information system, HMIS record, showing that the person was living in a place not meant for human habitation. Again, the homeless management information system, or HMIS records, are generated by one of the organizations participating in the continuum of care. Continuum of care and coordinated entry was again covered in this morning's session, and somewhat confusing. If you missed this session and would like more information, the presentation will be available on our website and YouTube channel in the coming days. Or it could be staff intake observation that homeless service providers observed or provided services to the person living in a place not meant for human habitation. If the person says they're in a shelter, transitional housing, or hotel motel paid by an organization, collect the appropriate supporting documentation. This could be the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS record, showing that the person lives in one of the places in the definition, or a referral from another housing provider or service provider stating that the person lives in a qualified location. If the person is staying in a hotel motel, then we need the documentation on the next slide. So either a letter from the hotel motel manager stating that the household lives in the hotel motel, or referral staff observation that they observed the household living in a hotel motel, plus documentation of a payment is needed. This could be canceled checks or receipts, bank statements that show costs were not paid by the household, or some other sort of documentation showing the payment, such as a charity or government program. Then the form is signed and dated by the applicant. If an applicant selected F or G on the pre-application, they could also qualify as homeless. These are F, leaving or having just left foster care, or G, leaving or have just left a jail, a hospital, or other publicly funded institution. On this declaration form for literally homeless, exiting an institution, the household would certify that they meet this criteria. Then project intake staff would gather the documentation. This includes a referral by another housing or service provider that the household was living in a place not meant for human habitation, or Homeless Management Information System record, HMIS, and discharge paperwork or written or oral referral from a social worker, case manager, or other appropriate official of the institution. Note that discharge paperwork must state the beginning and end dates of the time residing in the institution. There's a checkbox for the intake staff to check to ensure the documentation meets the requirement. The household would sign and date the form. Here's the here's the full definition for imminent risk of homelessness, Category 2. An individual or family who will lose their primary residence within 14 days, has not identified a subsequent residence, and lacks the resources or support network to obtain permanent housing. We took this definition and made one declaration form. If someone qualifies under homeless Category 2 imminent risk, they would have selected criteria C on the pre-application screener, that they are going to lose their current housing in 21 days or less from today. On this declaration for homelessness Category 2 imminent risk, the applicant will certify that they meet the criteria, and in the next step, they should indicate if the eviction notice did not provide a way to avoid eviction, or if there was a way to prevent eviction, staff must collect documentation to show that the applicant cannot meet the required steps to avoid loss of housing, such as bank statements with balances that show they cannot pay overdue rent, or a termination notice from work indicating their income has been reduced. Then the staff has to document the other criteria. This could include a court order resulting from an eviction that requires the individual or family to leave their residence within 14 days after the date of their application for homeless assistance. Make sure to include the date of the court order and what kind of order it is. Documentation could also include a notice equivalent to an eviction action under applicable state law. Again, make sure to indicate the date of the notice and what kind of action. Finally, documentation could be a notice to quit or vacate. Again, include the date of the notice. Of course, this form also has to be signed and dated by the household. Okay, here we go. Homeless Category 3 is extremely long. It takes up 2 slides. The category pertains to unaccompanied youth under 25 or families with children and youth who do not qualify as homeless under this definition, but do qualify under another act. Most often the households would qualify under the McKinney-Vento or VAWA acts, and they have not had a lease for 60 days prior to applying for assistance. Here's the second half of the definition, which includes experiencing persistent instability, which can be expected to continue for an extended period of time due to a chronic disability, chronic physical or mental health conditions, or other barriers to employment. If someone qualifies under homeless Category 3, they would have selected criteria F or G on the pre-application screener. These are, I have moved 2 or more times in the last 60 days and or have not had a lease in the past 60 days, and I am age 24 or under, or in a family with children and another agency has qualified me as homeless, including but not limiting to a school, supplemental nutrition assistance program or SNAP, social worker, etc. Now here's the declaration for homeless category 3. The household under homeless category 3 has to certify to much of the criteria on this declaration form. Qualification under homeless category 3 is not very common, as it is very long and in an involved definition. That the unaccompanied youth or family must qualify under one of the acts, have not had a lease in the past 60 days, moved at least twice, and is expected to continue this way, and has 2 or more barriers to employment. The documentation for category 3 is also very lengthy and has many steps, as can be seen here on this declaration, including certification of homeless status under another statute by an agency or referral, records of where the household has been staying, diagnosis from a professional, and barriers to employment. The documentation is then signed and dated as certification by the head of household. This form even includes a footnote for all the statutes that the household could qualify for under item 1. This footnote must be checked against the documentation to support item number 1 to make sure the referring agency is using an acceptable definition. There we go. HOME-ARP has defined a unique population that's not found in many other homeless assistance programs, and it is a household that was formerly homeless. So that means the household was documented to have met one of the definitions of the previous slides, that the household received assistance so that they would not be homeless, but the assistance they are receiving is going to run out. If it runs out, if the assistance runs out, the household is expected to return to homelessness. This formerly homeless household would qualify under HOME-ARP. To qualify for this population, the application must have selected I'm currently in my home and receiving temporary housing assistance from a program, but that's going to run out soon on the pre-application screener. The same third-party documentation as a homeless definition would be needed, along with documentation of the current assistance end date by the agency providing assistance and demonstration of additional need. Then here's the declaration, and the staff has to document the criteria utilizing this declaration. First, the evidence of prior homelessness, which could be a homeless management information system, HMIS record, a referral by another housing or service provider, or something similar, and documentation of current assistance showing an end date, which could include a contract or assistance agreement with an agency or a referral from another housing or service provider listing the assistance provided and an end date, or something similar. And the demonstration of additional need, which could include bank statements, employment termination notice, unemployment compensation statement, healthcare bills showing arrears, or something similar. And finally, the applicant must certify that the information they provided is true and correct. Okay, now I'll turn it back over to Wendy to go over the at-risk of homelessness categories. Wendy?
Thank you, Peg. So we're going to be moving on, and next we're going to be discussing at-risk homelessness category 1, which includes an annual income, meaning that the household of the applicant has to have an annual income less than 30% AMI, or area median income, without sufficient resources or support networks to prevent them from becoming homeless, and meet a condition listed in the statute, which includes but not limited to the following. Has moved because of economic reasons 2 or more times during the 60 days immediately preceding the application for assistance. Is living in a home of another because of economic hardship. Lives in a hotel or a motel and the cost is not paid by a charitable organization or by federal, state, or local government programs for low-income individuals. Or lives in a single room occupancy or an efficiency apartment or unit in which there resides more than 2 persons, or they live in a larger housing unit which there resides more than 1.5 or more than 1.5 persons per bedroom, or is exiting a publicly funded institution or care system. So here's the declaration, part of the declaration. Someone may qualify under at-risk of homelessness individuals and families if they selected A, B, D, F, or G, which is, again, I have moved 2 or more times in the last 60 days or have not had a lease in the past 60 days. I'm living with someone else because of economic reasons. I'm living in a hotel or a motel and running out of money and or assistance. I'm living in an overcrowded situation, meaning more than 1.5 persons per bedroom. And again, don't count the kitchens and the bathrooms. I'm leaving or have just left foster care. That's another qualifier. Or I am leaving or having just left a jail, a hospital, or other publicly funded institution. Documentation for at risk of homelessness includes income qualifications and a certification of lack of resources and support, and an eviction notice that demonstrates one of the criteria, or notice of termination from employment that demonstrates one of the criteria, or bank statements that demonstrate one of the criteria. Written statements by a relevant third party. These can include, but not limited to, a former employer, primary leaseholder, public administrator, hotel or motel manager. Staff now has to document the criteria with the declaration form, which we have provided here on the screen. If the applicant has moved because of economic reasons 2 or more times during the 60 days immediately preceding the application for assistance, the document you will need could be a homeless management information, also known as HMIS record, or a referral from housing or service provider, or a letter from a tenant or owner, or something similar. And the economic documentation, which could be a notice of termination from the employer, healthcare bills showing or indicating arrearage or arrears, or utility bills indicating arrears or something similar or comparable. If B is selected on this form, living in the home of another because of economic hardship, then the file would need a letter from the tenant or homeowner, or referral staff observation or something similar, and documentation of economic hardship as discussed a few moments ago. If the person is living in a hotel, they select D, lives in a hotel or motel, and the cost is not paid by a charitable organization or by federal, state, or local government programs for low-income individuals. Then the staff will need a letter from the hotel or motel manager or a referral staff observation or something similar, and document the costs have not been covered by another third-party organization, such as a charitable organization or government program, which also could be canceled checks, receipts, bank statements, or other comparable types of documentation. If E is selected, lives in a single room occupancy, also known as an SRO, or an efficiency unit in which there resides more than 2 persons, or lives in a larger housing unit in which there resides more than 1.5 persons per bedroom. Both of these situations with overcrowding in a unit and in a house. So these are examples of overcrowding. This situation has to be documented, and the types of documentation that's acceptable is to collect unit details, for instance, maybe from a tax assessor's office, if it's a house, or a copy of a lease, contract, or referral staff observation, or something similar to show the count and the number of rooms and persons living in that unit or house. If F is selected, then you document that they are exiting a publicly funded institution or system of care. Documentation includes discharge from a healthcare facility, mental health facility, foster care, other youth facility, or correction programs may include discharge paperwork or a referral letter from a facility. And the applicant must sign and certify their circumstances. The intake or property staff must also document and verify the applicant's income and that their income must be less than 30% area median income, or AMI. Definition 1, Category C, is the most common definition used for at risk of homelessness. It's an individual or family with income less than 30% AMI and without sufficient resources or support networks to prevent them from becoming homeless, and meets one of the several conditions that indicate risk of homelessness. There are many criteria in statute, and some of the most commonly used are: 1, moved 2 or more times in the past 60 days because of economic reasons. Will lose the right to occupy the current housing within 21 days. Lives in a hotel or motel that's not paid by a government program or a charity. Is exiting a public institution or a system of care. To qualify for this population, the applicant would have selected, I'm going to lose my current housing in 3 weeks, 21 days or less from today. The staff documents the reasons for which the applicant received a notice to quit or vacate, which can include non-payment of rent, lease violations, holdover tenancy, lease expiration date, or something similar. The eviction notice should demonstrate that the notice did not provide a way to remedy the situation and avoid eviction or termination. So an example of this would be a household is leasing a unit that experiences an unexpected casualty loss. The owner needs the household to vacate in order to fix the unit. Or the notice provided a way to remedy the situation and avoid eviction, but the applicant cannot meet the terms of avoiding the eviction or termination. For instance, the household is several months behind on rent, but cannot pay all the past due rent with late charges due to economic reasons. If this is the situation, the applicant must provide documentation to show they cannot meet the terms of avoiding the eviction, such as bank statements, copy of the termination notice, or unemployment compensation statement, or a health care bill showing arrears, or something similar or comparable that they cannot pay the overdue balance. The applicant signs and certifies this declaration. Both at risk of homelessness category 2 and 3 have to do with a household qualifying as homeless under other statutes, such as the Runaway or Homeless Youth Act, or the Head Start Act, or in the case of category 3, the McKenty-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, which is mainly used in schools. The documentation for children and youth and their families is a certification by the agency that administers the other programs under which the household qualifies. If an applicant may qualify under at-risk homeless category 2 or 3, they would have selected L on the pre-application. I'm 24 or under, or in a family with children, and another agency has qualified me as homeless, including but not limited to a school, supplemental nutritional assistance program known as SNAP, social worker, or other comparable types of documentation. The box should be checked regarding which referral letter or documentation was received, either the McKenty-Vento Act, usually used in schools, or one of the other acts listed on the slide, on the previous slide under the first box. Next, the staff documents the criteria with the certifications from the agency administering the applicable federal program. If the applicant is a homeless child or youth, and the letter provided by the agency administering the federal program or an agency standardized form will serve as documentation. In this situation, the unaccompanied youth under 25 years of age would qualify as homeless under the Runaway or Homeless Youth Act, the Head Start Act, the Violence Against Women's Act, Public Health Service Act, Food and Nutrition Act of 2008, or the Child Nutrition Act of 1966. If trying to qualify the homeless children and youth with families and guardians or unaccompanied youth under the McKenzie-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, the required documentation is a letter or a written referral provided by an agency administering the McKenzie-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And again, staff would confirm that the family or guardian is residing with children and youth, if applicable, and the household would sign the certification. Sorry, I went a little far there on the slides. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Peg to talk about the greatest risk of housing instability.
Thanks, Wendy. At greatest risk of housing instability is defined as a household that either has an annual income that is less than or equal to 30% of the area median income and has experienced severe cost burden, which means that they're paying greater than 50% of monthly household income towards housing costs. Or the second definition or sub-definition is that they have an annual income that is less than or equal to 50% of the area median income and meets one of the at-risk of homelessness criteria that we just went over. So documentation of the extremely low income with severe cost burden includes an income evaluation form, documentation of the extremely low income with severe cost burden includes an income evaluation form and source documents for assets and a copy of the lease or rental agreement showing cost burden. Documentation for the at-greatest risk of housing instability is similar to at risk of homelessness, but with a higher income, which can be up to or equal to 50% of the area median income. However, you don't need to document the lack of resources and supports for this sub-definition. So here on slide 64, if someone is trying to qualify under greatest risk of housing instability, severe cost burden, they would have selected H on the pre-application screener, which is I can't afford my current housing because more than half of my income goes to rent. So here you can see on slide 65 with the declaration. Oh no, can you go back one, Wendy, please? There you go. So on slide 65, the staff documents that the applicant is severely cost burdened by proving that the household is spending more than 50% of their total monthly income on housing by determining total monthly income and housing costs. Proof of income can be bank statements or pay stubs or unemployment or child support or other sources of income. Proof of current housing costs can be documented with the lease or a letter from the leaseholder or owner if the applicant is not on the lease. The letter should state the amount that the household pays for housing, not including utilities. The applicant certifies the declaration and the staff documents the applicant's gross income, current housing cost, and a derived percentage. Now, the greatest risk of housing instability criteria is for applicants who would have qualified for the at-risk of homelessness criteria, but their income is too high. For the at greatest risk of housing instability criteria, households can earn up to 50% of the area median income instead of 30% of the area median income in the at-risk of homelessness criteria. So all that Wendy just discussed before about the at-risk of homelessness criteria also applies to at greatest risk of housing instability, except that their income is higher and there is no need to document the lack of resources and support. An applicant may qualify under greatest risk of housing instability cost burden if they selected the same letters on the pre-application screener as the applicants qualifying under at risk of homelessness, but they have more income, up to or at 50% of the area median income. This includes all of the pre-application categories on the slide, which we recently reviewed for at risk of homelessness. As you can see, the declaration for at greatest risk of housing instability is the same declaration for at risk of homelessness, but with more income, up to or equal to 50% of the area median income. So again, it's just pretty much the same declaration. And the applicant must sign to certify, I think we're at number 70. There you go. Awesome. The applicant must sign to certify, and the staff must document their income, which has to be at or under 50% of area median income. Okay, Wendy's going to do the last QP. So Wendy.
Thank you, Peg. I appreciate that. So the last qualifying population for HOME-ARP are persons fleeing, attempting to flee, domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. Please note the Violence Against Women's Act Reauthorization Act of 2022 went into effect October 1st, 2022. Since 2017, the Compliance Monitoring Rules, also known as Subchapter F, has incorporated all VAWA requirements for all properties under our jurisdiction. Properties are already required to provide the notice of occupancy rights under the VAWA to applicants at the time of application, including when the application is approved or denied for housing. This form is often referred to as the 5380 and is available on our website with all our other VAWA forms under the Compliance tab. Documentation examples include having the applicant complete the certification of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault or stalking, and human trafficking, which is also available on our website under form number 5382. Other acceptable documentation includes a written certification by the victim service provider, an intake worker, social worker, legal assistance provider, healthcare provider, law enforcement agency, legal assistance provider, pastoral counselor, or any other intake worker or other organization from whom the individual or family sought assistance with, or a written certification by the individual or head of household. All of our properties are encouraged to use our Violence Against Women Act forms that are available on our website. If someone qualifies under domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking, they would have selected K on the pre-application. I'm fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. The applicant will sign and certify that they are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking. That they believe that there is a threat of imminent harm from further violence due to dangerous or life-threatening conditions that relate to violence against them or family members, including a child that has taken place in their home or has made them or a member of their family afraid to return or remain in their home. In the case of sexual assault, they certify that the assault occurred on the premises during the 90 days period preceding the date of the request for transfer, or that they have reasonably believed that there is an imminent harm from further violence if they remain in the unit. Staff certification includes options for non-victim service providers. If there's not a threat to safety, the applicant's self-certification is supported by a third-party written referral source from whom assistance was sought for domestic violence, or an intake worker's observation. For victim service providers, a self-certification or an oral record signed by, and dated by true and complete by the victim service provider. The recorded oral statement information has been verified and staff signs the document. Veterans and families that include a veteran family member that meet the criteria for one of the qualifying populations described above or in this presentation are eligible to receive HOME-ARP assistance. Note, Homeless or at risk of homeless veterans, including wounded warriors as defined in Caring for Wounded Warriors Act of 2008, are also allowable preferences under TDHCA's HOME-ARP allocation plan. That concludes my part. I'm going to turn it over to Peg to bring us home. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. To recap our presentation today, we introduced the different qualifying populations eligible to participate in the HOME-ARP program. We introduced the eligibility manual and resources it contained. We discussed eligibility through referrals and the preferred order of documentation. Then we went through the pre-application screener and how it's used. Finally, we went into detailed definitions of each qualifying population and how to determine their eligibility and document their files by using the corresponding declarations found in the manual. Thank you for joining us for the webinar today. Please visit the HOME-ARP website for any additional guidance, and today's presentation will be available there and on our YouTube channel in a few days. Looks like we have some time for questions, and Naomi, do we have any?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so we got a few questions. The first one is going back towards the beginning of the presentation, Wendy. This is about what source documentation means. Can you go over what that means one more time?
Sure. So source documentation, first, what I talked about earlier was firsthand documentation or source documentation. So that could be, source documentation can be something that's already available, that's third party. That could be things that are things such as pay stubs or bank statements that are already available. Other types of verification would be third party verification, where you're seeking information from a third party source, such as maybe a service provider or something of that nature, where they fill out a form, or employment verification, where they fill out that form and return it to you. The difference is with the source documentation, the applicant can bring that to you. They can bring you copies of their check stubs or bank statements and things that are already generated. However, third-party verifications must be completed, may not be handled by the hands of the applicant. So they need to either be sent directly to and from the source at the property level. So if I was verifying employment, I would send it directly to the employer and then have the employer return it directly back to me. Did I answer that question?
Yes, that was very clear. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. We had one more for HOME-ARP staff. I'll go ahead and answer this one. Can you explain the rent, no rent situation? So this presentation about QPs was about all the QPs, and it's good demonstration about how many QPs, how many qualified populations we have in HOME-ARP. Now, as Peg and Wendy mentioned, some of the definitions for QPs are very long and involved and probably won't be used often, if ever. However, we wanted to give you resources in case someone can qualify under those. But all of these qualified populations for covered in this presentation, they will pay 30% of their income toward rent. So it's not one of the QPs will pay 30%, it's all of the QPs. So all of the QPs in this presentation pay 30% of their income towards rent, which could be zero rent if they have zero income, and we are underwriting those. For zero rent. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay. I don't see any more specific questions. So with that, let's see, hold on. I'm going to thank everyone who attended today, and also, of course, Wendy, Peg, and Tiara for presenting. And we will be posting these later and going over any questions that we could not answer directly. If we didn't get to your question, please go ahead and email us about that. All right,